He's the man at the frontier of Blaze Media's coverage of tech. Peter Gietl joins us. I'm James Poulos. This is Zero Hour. Peter Gietl is the managing editor of Return and Frontier magazine here at Blaze Media. Well, let's talk about that. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks so much for having me, James.
How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay, so this is an era of the return to the frontier is what I would say. Like every area of human life, people are sort of either trying to run away from what we've been doing, running toward like a safe space or a blank space or somewhere where they can catch their breath, somewhere where they can find some alpha, as the VCs like to say. Everyone's looking for a new horizon. How does that make you feel, if you think I'm right?
I think it's an exciting time. I think that there's a huge opportunity and people are really hungry to try and build new ways of living, new ways of thinking, new ways of community, which ties into tech in a lot of ways. And I think that that's that impulse of we want to reform, we want to rebuild, we want to live our lives in a way that brings fulfillment that's not just monetary, but something deeper.
Yeah, so I mean, some people are sort of frightened by this prospect because they think, right under the veneer of American life is like this primal chaos or like anarchy, Cormac McCarthy style. If you send a guy into the wilderness, he turns into a monster after a couple of days. That's kind of the, I think there's a lot of fear about America breaking up or people sort of splitting off into weird directions. So how do you address that kind of darker side or that fear that people have? How do you sort of gather enough people together to make sure that it doesn't spiral out?
I mean, I don't know if I have the solution for that, but I'm pretty white-pilled in the sense of, I think it's been part of the American existence and the American experience forever, that kind of anarchy, that kind of head to the frontier and make your own way and build something and create something. So I don't find that scary, or I think that that's a bad thing in any way. I think that that's always been an American impulse that's really part of us, and maybe it's kind of gone away as we become more corporatized and run by a managerial class, but I think that it still exists in the American ethos and the American spirit, and I think it's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's tough because a lot of people feel outside of their political comfort zone these days.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute, I woke up and it's not like 1998 anymore, like what happened? And it's true, we do have increasingly powerful like foreign rivals, and they have an interest in making life more difficult for America, for sowing some divisions, and for taking people's eye off the ball of America and sending it off in some other direction. But look, if we can't sort of go about our own business in the way that Americans always have, if we can't pursue what it is that allows us to get the most kind of traction in our own lives, then it doesn't matter if we have like a powerful government or can project power around the world. That's really kind of the end of American life, right?
Yeah, I mean, what are you working for, or what are you trying to conserve if we don't have that aspect of us anymore? And I mean, I think this idea that we have to have guardrails, or that it's scary that if people are going out there and trying to build new communities, or people are moving to a state because it more aligns with their political viewpoints, I think that's great, and I don't think that that's going to lead to chaos or anarchy or anything like that. I think it's going to allow people to live a better life.
Yeah, so let's talk about that in the context of tech, because you got at this point basically two camps. I think it's pretty clear. Like everything else, is getting pretty sharply polarized. On the one side, you got big tech, and we all know who that is. Basically, state-sponsored, state-run, state-affiliated tech firms. And then you've got the outsiders, and some of these outsiders at this point are pretty big. It's starting to be like major VC firms and public figures, and Elon Musk, who we'll talk about in a little bit. Not exactly not exactly not big, but if you're not part of the federal government or basically, subcontracted out from various security agencies, then you are, in a certain sense, little tech, and that's what some of them are starting to call themselves. You got these two camps. One vision of the frontier of sort of the America's tech future is, we know what it is: increased consolidation, increased hierarchy, limited freedoms, increased surveillance, centralized command and control. It sounds a lot like communism, but it's presented as our sacred democracy, which is sort of interesting attempt at spinning things. And then on the other hand, you've got that kind of more anarchic or freewheeling thing. You've got rustling up cash from around the world to fund American enterprise. You've got startups. You got lone founders, people who might be seen as crazy or eccentric. Even if you're talking about Elon Musk, like, this is someone who's put himself in the path of the regime and is willing to kind of take things in a direction that is not government approved and does not get the thumbs up from the bureaucrats. Some will say, oh, but Starlink, and but he's taking advantage of tax credits for EVs, and okay, sure, but he's also doing stuff with
I've never understood that critique of him, of why, if you were a businessman, why wouldn't you take advantage of a tax credit that's available?
Well, especially tax credits like these. I mean, it's really getting crazy. I think that Tesla's right now like 1.9 APR and 7,800 cash back. Like, okay, so he's taking advantage of the system, but it's hard to see him as working for the system in the same way. So obviously the line of attack against decentralized tech, against little tech, is you can't trust them. Who knows where the money's coming from? Giving people these powerful tools is going to lead to injustice. How do you respond to all that?
Well, I mean, I'll push back a little bit. I think it's, when we use the term big tech, it's a little more complex than it's just like a monolith that all thinks the exact same way, and they're all just like run from a top-down structure of, I mean, unfortunately, these companies have gotten so big that they've really just turned into bureaucracies. And I mean, I know Google pretty well, and it's half the time one division doesn't even know what the other division is doing, and it's become such a large monolith that it's hard to even control what's going on, which I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for other tech companies to come in and take advantage of that.
Is it shocking to you that Google has gotten itself into such a weird corner where search doesn't work and they're falling behind on AI and all that?
Yeah, I think that this is just my opinion, but I think that they were very concerned about the implications that AI was going to have on their search, which still represents approximately like 88 to 92% of their revenue, despite all the companies and all the startups they funded. And I imagine they're going to figure out a way to monetize that in some way, but I know that internally it really did scare them about the effect that AI is going to have on search and change how people search for things on the internet, which directly impacts their main source of revenue.
Okay, so as far as the little guys are concerned in tech, how do you see that shaking out? Do they have a good chance at pulling some of the reins of tech power away from Washington and away from big tech?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, if you look back at the history of Silicon Valley and tech in general in America, there is a real libertarian streak and an anarchic streak and wanting to kind of push back against the man. And I think that even though it's been subsumed by this giant orgs and blob that then is trying to send its tentacles out across the country, I think there still is an impulse in a lot of people within even those companies still. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities for smaller companies to come in and create new ways of doing things. And I mean, AI is one of those tools that is extremely powerful and could upend the monopolization that we've seen with these companies in a wide variety of sectors.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see, some of these guys down in El Segundo, in my old haunts in LA. They're putting up huge American flags and saying like, yeah, we're the kind of mavericks here, but we're more American than these entrenched firms that are all interwoven with the bureaucracy.
Running on Zen and caffeine.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's how they do it. Okay, so return. Blaze.com/return, kind of new on the scene. What are you trying to do with tech coverage that isn't already out there?
Well, I think that there's a big opportunity. I mean, for better or worse, tech touches almost every aspect of our life, of how we interact with each other, with our families, how we travel, how we work, how we live. And, there's plenty of downsides to that too, and there's plenty of upsides. I think that Return is trying to cover technology with an eye towards holding on to our humanity in this digital world. And, I mean, in a simple way, we're trying to be a non-woke Wired. There is a lot of cool stories that are covered. It's not all doom and gloom. There's a lot of interesting things out there, interesting companies that are getting built that don't hate Americans, that actually love our freedoms and want to use technology to kind of secure our rights and our way of life. And so it's great to kind of champion and cover those stories. And then there's also some, big stories about digital surveillance and spying that a lot of these major news organizations don't cover anymore, or don't cover as much because they either agree with it or they're concerned. So I think that there's a huge opportunity to cover these stories, to champion companies that believe in our way of life and don't want to enslave you to the Borg, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, it's really bizarre. There's still so many Americans don't really have a full picture of kind of where we're at, either the good news or the bad news. And a lot of that is just a result of this kind of failure of tech coverage. I mean, Wired used to be a solid place to go to just get your arms around what was happening, how fast, who was involved, what's in it for me, just basic stuff. And now, I don't know the last time you picked up an issue, probably not that long ago. It's really just fallen so far. I think it's published out of the UK now. It's got kind of this Globo sort of spin on it. Half the thing that I flipped through was all about sort of climate change or whatever. I mean, it's really come a long way, and not in a good way.
Well, and I've been looking through some older magazines from like the early 2000s, and it was not that way.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if you agree with this. There seems to be a current of some of these people just seem to like also hate technology too.
Yeah,
but then they champion these giant corporate monopolization. So I don't know where that comes from.
No,
do you have a theory?
Do I have a theory? I mean, gosh, like I think it's a combination of things. Like you've seen kind of journalists go through this kind of weird psychodrama where they can't really do anything else. They were raised up believing that journalism mattered and that this is how we get at the truth and this is how we help people make sense of the world. And, in the abstract, like, well, okay, that was more or less correct once upon a time. Is it now? Like, not as much. Is that mostly because technology? Like, well, I don't know. You can look at things like Reddit and you can say, see, this is proof that technology made it worse for everyone. You just get all these freaks together and they flood the zone with their doo-doo opinions and their crazy takes. And, you can't have real journalism. This is a guild, we're the keepers of the flame, fourth branch of government or whatever it is. Kind of. Okay, but then you look at like OpenAI, which is, one of the more like nefarious, whether intentionally or otherwise, kind of AI companies, and a guy like Sam Altman who's like sort of playing with the Chinese in America and trying to position himself as Lex Luthor or something. I'm not exactly sure, what's going on in his head, but what I see doesn't make me feel so hot. And companies like that are inking deals right now with companies like Reddit, where it's like, okay, so wait a minute, who's really flooding the zone with bad content? Is it more like the little guy, or is it more like these big tech firms that want to basically digitize our form of governance into something that kind of just sucks resources, visible and invisible, out of the American people in order to build this kind of this Borg overlay over everything? So, I think it's really not anywhere near as simple as what your average Wired journalist or NPR journalist would have to say, the narrative they make, like a Kara Swisher or somebody, just very much like technology is bad. The people who created it are sort of, greedy, patriarchal, like, just bad dudes, white boys, privileged white boys.
Yeah.
And they've destroyed our ability to engage in the discourse together. That seems to be like a hard case to make at a time when the solution that they're advancing is, as you suggest, to put artificial limits on the development of technology, which they come up with because they think they know what's best for everyone. And then to put artificial limits on what people can say and what people can do. Limits on free association online, limits on, of course, on speech. Speech isn't everything, but it is important, and most of what happens on the internet is some form of communication. And so if you want to kill people's right to free association, it really helps to go after their free speech rights on the internet. So, for all the sympathy that I do have to some of the better arguments where it's like, oh wow, yes, if you build a collective consciousness on the internet, it's going to drive everyone crazy. I think that's broadly true, and I think most people would generally agree with that, in spite of how often we all use our phones. But the prescription, their proposed solution, is even worse.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely accurate. I mean, I think they really did have a freak out about open communication and people sharing their opinions. They really did not like the little guys sharing their opinions and how that went, which you saw this tremendous push towards centralization and stamping out any opinions that they didn't agree with, right or left. They would go after people that were on the hard left, and they're deplatforming those people as well. And I mean, I'm curious your thoughts too about, I think this gets back a lot with OpenAI and some of the regulations that they're talking about AI of, you see a lot of these scare tactics of, the AI is going to take over and it's going to kill everyone and no one's going to be employable anymore. And in exchange, let us be the only people that are allowed to have AI. And I don't buy that argument. And maybe it's true that AI is going to destroy us all, but it seems like a very bad faith argument from, as I agree completely with you, these nefarious people like Altman, that, and the solution is just let us have a monopoly over this technology.
What a coincidence. Yeah. Well, which is extra funny to me because, obviously Altman took OpenAI in a much different direction than Elon Musk wanted to take it, and sort of found a way to squeeze him out. I think it was the first time that Elon really lost a battle at that level. And the memes that he's been churning out about closed AI are not just true, but it's also sort of you can see the frustration there. We'll talk a little bit more about Elon, but I always have a laugh when I think about Neuralink, which what's the sales pitch of Neuralink, and it's strangely similar to what you described, where it's bad news, you guys, technology is going to become so powerful that it's going to eclipse our human capabilities unless we take the radical step of everyone putting my chip into their brains. What a great sales pitch. If it was my job to try to get a chip into everyone's heads, that's probably the most powerful sales pitch that you can make. On the other side, on the Sam Altman side, it's strangely similar, but it's even more nefarious because it's not just a chip in your brains, it's a government chip in your brains, and it's the chip in the brain becomes the form of governance.
Well, I mean, do you think that is kind of this internal argument on these high levels in Silicon Valley of no, it's a singularity, but it's going to be the based singularity versus no, this is actually going to be the Borg sponsored deep state singularity. Yeah, I don't know if that's accurate or.
I think there's a lot to that, and it's interesting to consider sort of why that is and what's going on under the hood. It's if your choices are the based chip in your brain or the woke chip in your brain, something incomplete about those offerings.
Yeah.
And then of course you've got the no labelsy sort of intellectual, rationalists come in and say that's why you need the neutral chip. It's sort of we're moving from pills where it's red pill, blue pill, clear pill to red chip, blue chip, clear chip. And it's
there has to be a space for no chip, right?
It's not Luddism to say that there's no chip, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's sort of these interesting questions about why is it that that we are kind of being pushed from every direction to embrace someone's singularity or other. It's kind of this weird market for singularities, and I think a lot of what's going on is the trajectory of tech progress in America for a long time, probably since the Manhattan Project, really dictated by military and intelligence research and development. That's just the way that it is, and we can try to hashtag do better, but we're kind of, one does not simply like jump off of that train without hurting yourself. And so one of the consequences of that is the marketplace for technology has been this kind of mutually reinforcing circle of like, well, we'll turn the weapons into entertainment, and we'll turn the entertainment into weapons, and we'll just keep kind of going around and around. And what that leads to is this idea that like, well, if we stop moving, we die. If we stop keeping the cycle spinning, we die. Google got a ton of criticism, which seemed quite fair-minded at the time from Peter Thiel, who said, look, they're just like kind of sitting on this hoard of cash. They don't know what to do anymore. They've kind of reached this dead end. They don't know how to innovate. They have no new ideas. They don't have a plan. And that's bad. And it did seem bad. This is like one of America's leading tech firms, and they want us to what? What frontier are they leading us toward? What is their vision? Is their vision to just kind of like beat us down with like ever more woke doodles on the Google search page until we finally all become like Google employees, like culturally? Like, what is the plan? We've seen like just over the past couple of years kind of the consequences of that approach, which is Google kind of falling behind and neglecting their core products and having this like leadership turnover and kind of this weirdness. But what has replaced that has not been something that kind of returns us to a more humane approach to technology, an approach that says like, okay, how do we actually make human life more protected from all of the temptations that we have to destroy ourselves, right? Instead of going down that path, it's been like, okay, well, Google sucks now, so we got to be like super Google. We got to be, organizing the world's information, which was what replaced "Don't be evil" as Google's motto. We got to organize all the world's information, all the world's people, all the world's consciousness. Real Tower of Babel hours, and I think we can do better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could be wrong, but sometimes I don't even think that they may not have an overarching plan of like, I think these bureaucracies get so large, whether it's the State Department or whether something like Google, where there's these stops and starts, and in some ways that's much more disconcerting that there really isn't anyone in charge exactly. I mean, I've heard a lot of talk from insiders is they don't know why search is broken, and they're desperately trying to figure out why it is, and they don't exactly know why it's broken.
That's fascinating.
And I think that they want to Googlefy everything and have everything connected in this way, and everyone is like slowly starting to look around and go, as our cities are breaking down too, it seems like our tech is starting to break down too, where it just doesn't work as well. Email doesn't work as well anymore. Search doesn't work as well. And I don't know the answer why that is or how to fix that, but it's something I think a lot of people are noticing.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the consequences of progressive brain poisoning, where you really become convinced that the only thing left for us to do is to just do more and push farther and not tend the gardens that we've already built, neglect whatever is yesterday's product, and just keep trying to like innovate in this increasingly narrow direction toward the singularity. I mean, you end up with this massive amount of wreckage. There's, I don't know what we were talking before the show, what percentage of the internet is gone now, even just stuff over the past 10 years. Like, it doesn't exist.
I read 40%. I wasn't able to fact check that, but that was an article I was reading that as much as 40% of the internet is like gone.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I think some of the most powerful critiques of big tech that we're getting out of little tech is along the lines of, it's just managerialism. It's just really entrenched bureaucratic managerialism. And forget about wokeness or baseness or whatever. Like, these people are really just all about continuing to keep the wheels of management spinning.
Well, I mean, do you think Musk has a point when he's like, a society is either in stasis or it's either going backwards or it's going forwards. It's never just in stasis. And to me, sometimes like it makes sense, but then it seems a little simplistic and also a misunderstanding of how humanity exists, that it isn't always just moving forward to one final end goal, that there's a lot of stops and starts and things that go sideways.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I wanted to do a deep dive into Musk with you, so this is as good a place as any to jump in. I mean, look, he had a tweet or a Zeet or an X post or whatever. Man, the branding challenge of figuring out how to get people to like say the right verb for the. Anyway, it was basically like there are two options, two camps. And camp number one is human extinction. Okay, that seems bad, right? And then camp number two is extend the light of consciousness throughout the galaxy, the universe. We got to get off planet Earth, got to become interplanetary. The stars are the limit. And that to me seems like just something that's like unfair to characterize things that way. It's a bit of a trick, I think. And look, I think on net, Elon's like moving in a pretty good direction. It's easy to point out what's wrong with Elon Musk, and people do, and they do so from the comfort of their posting couch, right? But if he was not on the scene, and if he was not moving in the direction that he is, I think things would be unambiguously worse in the era of tech, just given kind of what the dominant alternatives are. Yeah. So, I want to be sure to lay that out. But I think, this is a guy who cares about free speech. He cares about the truth being in circulation or whatever. So he should care about like friendly criticisms too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, the reality is like, no, we do not have to choose between blasting human beings into the stars and everyone dies. That's just factually inaccurate. And beneath the factual layer is the deeper level of like, is it spiritually accurate? And spiritually, it's like, should we think about Earth in the same way that we think about Google search, where it was like, okay, like we used it once and it was pretty good, and now it's like not so good because we're focused on other more important, even bigger, more ambitious things. So we should just like pour as much energy as we can into blasting off out of Earth or Google search and into some even like more grandiose and all-encompassing project. That I think spiritually does a tremendous disservice to the home that we've been given, and even spiritually to take that extra step and say like, you don't even have to be like one of these, Greta Thunberg people who says, this is Gaia, this is Mother Earth, like this is our home forever. We must never leave. We have to make sure that like every, person has access to EBT before we send one person into space. Right. Like that kind of like nature worshiping, if you're doing sort of God worshiping instead of earth worshiping, you're going to say this isn't our permanent home. This is what we've been given and we don't want to abandon it, but we're all just visiting, at the end of the day. And even if we continue to repopulate the earth, as is a good idea, although we can also talk about, Elon's characterization of like, there's team extinction or team like endless babies forever, regardless of circumstances.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a book, I think it's Liar's Poker by Stephen Jay Gould, where he talks about there's this human idea that it's all like a linear progression or like regression, and it's actually not like backed up by physics or math or human history. But I mean, I guess I'll take the other approach though too of, I think there's something to be said about aspiring to the stars and aspiring to explore, because it's the final frontier, not to be cliche, but I think that it inspires something in humanity to want to go out and build and explore and find out. And I think that's a great thing. And I think that it's not just about, why are we wasting money sending robots to Mars? It's like that's a core part of humanity, is to get up and explore and conquer and build. And I think that in a small way, I think that that's something that's aspirational for people that actually is a good thing. Whether or not we're going to put people on Mars or whatever. Yeah,
I mean, look, I think there are serious grounds for real skepticism about the Mars project. Some of them, I've spoken to some Silicon Valley denizens who are broadly supportive of Musk, and they're like, not going to happen. It's too much money, too much time. You finally get there. What do? You turn around and go back, or you just sort of die, like grow potatoes for I don't know how many centuries. Before, it's all a bit far-fetched. And I guess there's
you don't believe in the terraforming technologies, or
I don't know. I mean, it sounds nice, and you see the pretty, artist renderings, and you're like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? And I guess it would potentially be cool. It could also be like, just kind of the tale as old as time of human beings getting out there and beginning to, kill each other and start interplanetary wars. I think that's all on the table, and some people would be willing to like take that risk or just let humans human or whatever. But it seems wrong to like ban rockets and like prohibit people from flying into space. And I know that seems like an increasing number of people, at least on the internet, but I know some of them in real life as well, are like, this is all a moot point. There's a firmament and you can't penetrate it. And when you see the rockets go up and then it looks like they're sort of skipping over, it's because you can't get to space. Setting aside all that, although I think it's fascinating that we are kind of going back to like, second look at medieval cosmology, like that is very interesting to see. Assuming that you could get to Mars in a rocket ship, I just don't think it makes sense to try to like force people not to do that,
Right, yeah. Well, I mean, we've seen, there's a lot to be concerned about Musk. I think the Neuralink thing, if you dig into that, and it's a little disturbing. It's a lot deeper than just trying to help people with paralysis walk. Yeah. There is definitely an impulse to put chips in our brains, which is extremely disconcerting. But I think you have to give Musk some credit and look at what he's done and what he's accomplished of reducing the cost of getting things to the space station and getting satellites up by several factors. And then the fact that we're able to communicate on X freely, I think it's everyone's just kind of taken it for granted that this has been, but you go back 3 years ago, it wasn't like that. And it was becoming terrifying that there weren't going to be ways to even communicate dissent against the regime.
Yeah.
And he was able to come in and take control of X and allow that to happen. And I think
he was the only
he deserves a lot of credit for that.
He was the only one who could even maybe do it.
Right.
And he did, and he's still doing it. So, no question about that. And it is, it's given the choice between, hey, let's spend trillions on going to Mars, and hey, let's spend trillions on building the AI data centers so that we can turn Earth into a sort of cyber prison that no one can ever leave, which is, this is just like a Bloomberg report from just a couple days ago as of whatever day it is now. We will need trillions of dollars in order to kind of realize the OpenAI vision. And, what's a dollar again? Like, can someone remind me what that even is? Is it just like some permanent member of the managerial class, like pressing the 0 button on like the ultimate keyboard and just adding zeros of magic money? Like, I don't know. It's not even just like spending trillions on AI instead of space would be a mistake, although I think forced to choose, it would be a mistake. But that creating a situation in which people become convinced that we literally have no choice but to make this kind of insane expenditure on like one thing that can rule us all, theoretically, that's terrible too. It's terrible financially, it's terrible spiritually. And so, Musk definitely spends more time than I would like framing things in that kind of we have no choice way. And, is it really capitalism? Is it really free markets when the sales pitch for every product is, we have no choice, we have to do this, just send me $9.99 a month, plus like, no, that's not right. That is a transformation of our economic system in what I think is a bad direction. On the other hand, we have to face up to the fact that he's competing for market share and mind share and ultimately spiritual share with people who are also making that we have no choice argument and making it into the service of products and services that I think are just much more hostile to human life and to a recognizably human future than putting people on, a very large rocket with a cheeky name and trying to land them on the nearest planet.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
I think this isn't discussed as much, but people are starting to notice in Silicon Valley too that there are spiritual components to these questions,
Yep.
that these are not the materialism and new atheism that was so in vogue of like, you're starting to see major people starting to have questions about the spiritual implications of how this, and obviously you've spent a lot of time in your career writing about this.
Has it been a lot of time? Sometimes it feels like it's been 4 months. Sometimes it feels like it's been 4 years. But yeah, the cults. We've seen. This is the latest wave of criticism around that kind of OpenAI. Whether it's effective altruism and what spun out of that. Just kind of classic California, like sex cult with like worshiping kind of new age, whatever.
So you don't think the AI priests are going to be taking over our spiritual matters?
They want to.
Yeah.
And you look at the CEOs and it's like they're bored with being CEOs, except Elon seems to still actually enjoy it. But he did refer to, this wasn't that long ago, he's like, yeah, I'm sort of in Texas, like on the ground, like sleeping in the factory sometimes. It's like I basically live in a tech monastery. So like there's this awareness. And it does seem kind of like cringe and outdated to just only be a CEO. Like people want to be hierarchs. They want to be priests, bishops, popes of the religion of technology, and to sort of define what that is and what it's in service of. It's a powerful force. It's not going anywhere. The wokies definitely beat the right wingers to the post of saying like, the only way that we can reestablish control of any kind over technology that's accelerating and progressing this quickly is by outcompeting the robots on like the last thing that we will have as a trump card over their abilities if things continue along this trajectory. And that is our spirituality. That is our ability to understand what to worship. And that is why that's what's going to give us the authority to tell the computer what to do instead of having the computer tell us what to do.
Yeah.
Is we're going to tell the computer what to worship rather than the other way around. I see these guys on X who are like, wrong, we're building the God. It's going to tell us to worship itself. It's going to know things that we can't know, and that's why we're doing this. So this is kind of a classic Western civilization throwdown where it's fundamental disagreements about what to worship, who to worship, how to worship, and a full-blown religious war over those questions that penetrates into politics and affects people's ideas about what kind of regimes should govern us. In some ways,
culturally and civilization-wise, the Russians and the Chinese and the Israelis also have different versions of how to think through this as well,
100%.
And then that's coming to the forefront
Absolutely.
in a lot of ways of how these, almost technology wars are unveiling.
Yeah, I am, probably about as far from a China apologist as you can get without being just like a really mean guy. But for many decades, probably centuries, maybe millennia, the Chinese view of the West has basically been like crazy people who do drugs in order to worship their weird gods. The Great Wall of China, like, what's that? Like, well, okay, to keep the Mongol warriors out, but really to keep the Mongol shamans out. The Mongolians, they had the shamans, they did the psychedelics, they worshiped their gods and whipped themselves into a certain kind of frenzy. And, that's something that can't be detached from what we all remember about the Mongols, which is the really good fighters, conquered all of Asia. And I think that's been the Chinese view of the West for a very long time, which is these people get themselves worked up, they distort their senses, they think that they're having some kind of religious experience, and then they just start conquering and killing and making people worship their gods. I don't think that's the correct characterization, but I can understand why a civilization like China, which is coming from such a distinct and kind of self-contained spiritual experience, would have those kinds of fears. It's interesting to see religion come back so much in the West, because that secular chestnut that we've heard from so long of like, well, all of the killing in the world only happens because of religion, and if we just imagined all the people living life in peace, then there would be no more fighting, there would be no more wars, it's the brotherhood of man, that whole kind of like that John Lennon or whatever rationalist version, that's kind of ebbing away, but gosh, it would just be, it would be foolish to claim that that Western civilization has not created these cycles of religious warfare, and I find it interesting, for that reason, to ask kind of like, well, like where does Western civilization end? Like in time and in space, are there parts of the West where we can see evidence that people were devout and did have a robust church life and didn't just ride off in search of monsters to destroy? And I do think that, you go back and look through, this is primarily Christian history, just because that's kind of the history that dominated the West for the purposes of at least this discussion. It was, that many Christians throughout history did not sort of have that psychic break and start killing each other. And certainly if you look at what happened to Westerners who said, oh, religion isn't going to save us, communism is going to save us, or war is going to save us, or the pagan gods are going to save us, whatever it is, their track record was even worse. You look at the real genocides, the real massacres, the real, the body count of those who renounced religion or sought to go beyond it. It's still much worse. So I think all that's going on. I think it's very important that we find some way of ensuring that with all of these powerful religious impulses rising back to the surface because of the questions that technology presents to us, that we don't all kill each other. Probably the best line from Donald Trump, in my estimation, I'm just trying to stop the world from killing itself. Who can argue with that?
Well, and I think there's a silver lining too of every time in human history when people have tried to install these top-down controls and control every aspect, they always end up failing. So I hope that will be the case. I mean, even something like China that did a huge push towards a central bank digital currency, and they mandated it, and they did this, and they have a level of technological control over their population that, we can't even imagine in the West, and they still failed at implementing a central bank digital currency. So that's, to me, slightly good news and makes me a little feeling a little positive for the future.
Yeah, it does. And I think to bring us back to Elon again, this is a guy who's been supportive of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. He may ultimately be supportive of them because he wants to be the guy to master that form of commerce, much in the same way that the federal government would prefer that it be them to maintain sort of sovereign control over the forms and flows of commerce. But at a certain level, it's very difficult to turn something like Bitcoin into an instrument of regime control. It's technically difficult. We've seen it with CBDCs, and obviously our federal government, at least the Biden administration, is clearly interested in kind of clawing all this stuff into the swamp, because they do feel weak, and they are fearful that these technologies are going to spiral out of their control, and perhaps already have. But I do think I do think it's just very, very difficult to actually pull off, even for like a hyper competent ruling class composed of ambitious, hardworking men, such as China's. And that if you look at a different society with a much different sort of ruling elite demographic, like America's, I don't know. I mean, these people are having a hard time stopping the airplanes from colliding on the tarmac. Are they really going to be able to turn America into a central bank digital currency state and eat Bitcoin? I don't know. It seems like to me they have a short runway, and they recognize that, and that's why they're trying to eat AI so that they can just have like a woke HR manager basically call the AI into a meeting and say like, okay, so we're going to need you to eat Bitcoin and create a CBDC and make sure that we use it to have like social justice, social credit. I think that's the game plan, and it's probably the only game plan that crew has available. So they're rushing toward it. But even still, with how fast this technology is developing, and with how fast they want to sort of get there, it does kind of seem like this regime it has serious weaknesses, serious competence gap, and that it might crumble before it has a chance to make it to that post.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm being naive, but that's what I hold on to as a glimmer of hope of, everything that they try to accomplish is pretty incompetent in the last 2 decades. I think that that's fair to point out across a wide variety, whether it's, misadventures with warfare or, the Obamacare website rollout is something as granular as that.
Remember that one?
Yeah. So, I don't. When they have these grand pronouncements, or there's these, concerns that they're going to control every aspect, it's like, well, that's possible, and that would be really terrible. But I also think they're pretty incompetent, and hopefully they won't be able to pull that off.
Yeah, that's right. What else is Musk doing that you think is for the good? You got the Optimus robot.
Yeah.
That might not really exist. We'll see. You got Starlink. Marshall McLuhan, people remember him for the Global Village, but he followed it up with the Global Theater, which is we've encased Earth in this satellite network that turns everything into a performance. And okay, that seems to be true now more than ever.
Well, there's that way to look at it, but I think on net, if you can get onto the internet in, a very poor area of Africa and learn new farming techniques or new irrigation techniques, or during the middle of a war, I think that's, or, maybe you're a homesteader out in the middle of nowhere and you get to have, great Wi-Fi connection because of Starlink. I think overall that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's there's another meme that's been going around is it's the phones, right? So you have all these graphs and charts and signs of social decline, and people are starting to catch up like, well, whoa, what is it that happened in 2012 or 2008 or whatever? Why does it's a mystery? And it's like, well, is it a mystery? Because we know what happened during that time, and not a lot else happened during that time. On the other hand, we do have to ask ourselves certain questions, like, well, who is it that created this technology? And what were they bringing to the table in terms of their expectations, their assumptions, their like spiritual priors, their habits, their entitlements? And then you realize that like, well, the American people at that time, this is a country that voted for Obama and thought that like, yes, the one-term congressman is going to be a good president because he's half black or whatever, or like he's a good soaring rhetoric, or like, I don't know, the other guy seems old or whatever. Like it was a time of great entitlement. It was a time when many Americans thought like, well, we built these machines, like of course they're gonna turn the world into America, and they're gonna turn America into Disneyland, and like incredibly naive. And you could say like, well, but that's like American optimism, or this is something different. And so maybe it's the phones, maybe it's the people who made the phones. If you send those smartphones down into Africa or India or whatever, is it really true that people are just going to immediately sit down and start like consuming OnlyFans, or Are they going to use it to like help each other like catch fish better or something? You know, like there are real questions here about whether it's more of the chicken's fault or the egg's fault.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, and I mean, they've had smartphones for a long time in Africa already.
Yeah.
But I think, I mean, another way to think of it also is like, I think, and maybe to bring it back to return of some of these companies and products that we're trying to review or champion, of it is important to kind of think through about your relationship with technology. And you can even see, Orthodox Jews don't use their electronics on Saturdays, and Mennonites use technology. And obviously you're not going to become a Mennonite, but it's kind of interesting to think through, like, oh, maybe I should like put my phone away and not use it for a few hours, or to completely turn it off when I'm having dinner with my wife. And there's products that lock your phone so you can't even access it, or computers that don't use blue light. There's a lot of interest, and I think that is important, that you start thinking through how you're using these products and how it's affecting your life, and try and put some like discipline and parameters of how you utilize it.
Yeah, I think so too, and it's something anyone can do starting right now. And this is just like standard issue spiritual wisdom here, where it's like, don't try to do it all at once. Don't call in the airstrikes. Attainable goals. Set yourself something that's challenging but achievable. Start chipping away at it. Don't spend all your time sitting around crying about how much you sucked in the past, or fearing, what kind of horrible things will happen to you in the future as a result. Yes, be aware, be humbled, recognize that you have like hurt yourself in certain ways by giving into these temptations to squander your life on the cheap pleasures of Candy Crush or whatever, But just start now, start with attainable stuff. It's like going to the gym. And this, if you want something a little bit more spiritually rich than, just apply the lessons of the gym to your phone use. This is like also the testimony of the saints. Like if you want to repair, restore your soul in that way, it's basically the same kind of process. So I think you're on track there. I want to be sure to take a little bit of time here at the end to just talk a little bit about this Frontier magazine that you're such an important part of in rolling out. Something that doesn't exist yet in public. Its first issue's going to be coming around the pike. What kind of hole is there in this market, this print market? It's a print publication. That you think Frontier is perfectly poised to fill?
It's been really exciting to work on with you. I think it's going to be a premium lifestyle magazine that kind of takes the quality level of like those coastal elite type magazines, and the beautiful photography and journalism and interesting stories, from whiskey reviews to profiles of people, and we're gonna put that lens on, the West, Middle America, tech entrepreneurs in El Segundo that are building something outside Silicon Valley, and I think that's really exciting. It's not just another magazine complaining about the world. It's really focused on really cool things that are happening in America, and young people that are building and creating and reshaping the country into, the next part of the next chapter of our history.
So we talked a little bit about Wired. Obviously, print has gone through the ringer, and this is another kind of one of these like interesting chicken and egg questions, where it's like, well, did print fall on hard times because of the technology, or did it fall on hard times because the kinds of people who started dominating print publications took them in directions that ultimately just weren't fruitful and couldn't find the audience?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both, but I think there's still a huge audience out there of people that having something in your hand, especially in this world where everything is digital and everything, here's another digital thing, here's a code, subscribe to one more subscription service. And instead to have something with, photography and beauty and art to hold in your hand is really, it's a rare thing and it's cool. And I think that there's still a lot of magazines that people really do enjoy and that have survived even in this digital era.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think it's important to remember, and I think it's like more relevant and more forceful now is that magazines are a multimedia product. It's not just wall-to-wall text. The visuals are so important. The look and feel, the vibe that's created. You can really kind of create a sort of world through a magazine, through a good one, in the same way that you can do it with cinema, for instance. And it's interesting to me that, late 20th century, there were ads, but we were talking about this not long ago. A lot of those ads had paragraphs of text in them, as if you'd sit down and the joke about Playboy was I read it for the articles, but back then people were reading the ads for the ad copy.
Yeah.
And now that's changed a lot, and I think that in general this kind of almost a worshipful attitude about words, about writing, where it's like, if you read the right books and you read the right magazines, you'll have everything you need to know about how to live well. And that was a very powerful force. Even once TV came along, for a long time there was a lot of bad TV. There was a lot of just kind of not lowbrow TV, and it was really considered like, well, sure, but what novels have you read? Like what magazines do you subscribe to? That was the real marker. It wasn't like, do you watch prestige television? That was not kind of where people were at culturally and in their experience with technology and with the different media. Now, print is not as prestigious as it used to be. No. It's not this kind of marker of social standing. People don't really read books like they used to. And while that, I agree, that had an impact on sort of what seemed like the decline of print, especially with magazines, we're now at a point where I think the magazine as a kind of artifact, as something that's not just for reading. You don't feel like you're under some kind of like social pressure to, I got to make sure that I read all these articles, or else I'm not going to have the right friends, or I'm not going to be able to get ahead in this world. That has all kind of subsided, and what has come up in its place, I think, is like more artful and more soulful, and something that can be, I guess, enjoyed with a better conscience. Something that isn't just for the eye, it is for the hand, and something that that isn't there because you have to write a book report about it. It's there so that you can have it on your coffee table and you can leaf through it at your leisure, and it can kind of contribute to the aesthetic atmosphere of your home or your office. Much in the way that maybe like a painting would, or one's favorite movies or little statues for your desk.
I think that's absolutely true. And magazines are this great combination of it's in between a book and it's in between a newspaper, where it's current stories, but it's not something. Part of it is also exhilarating of it's not in that 24-hour news cycle where you have to rush to get out a take that maybe isn't very well thought out or that insightful. But with a magazine, you get time to kind of breathe and think through and actually do some real journalism or some real writing, and then have that, beautiful images to go along with it. I think that's a really exciting form of media. And I think that it's a lot of people, especially on the right, have wanted something beautiful and something that they can put in their house that isn't just another, complain fest about how bad the world is.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to hate America in order to love magazines or to read them. Yeah. Peter, Gietl, thanks so much for joining us. Looking forward to Frontier, and this is a time of a return to frontiers, and so with Return to Frontier, I think you're right on the right track there.
Thank you so much, James.
Absolutely. All right, that's all the time we got, at least until next time around. If you're watching on YouTube, give us that like, give us that subscribe, comment below who you would like me to interview next time around. Until then, this is Zero Hour. I'm James Poulos, and may God have mercy on us all.